Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Freedom Papers, powered by Turning Point USA, sponsored by me, Morgan Zegers, your favorite little history nerd. And I'm really excited because we have one of my friends, Connor, here, Connor Clegg. We'll get into what you do and stuff. He works with Turning Point. He's here in the HQ, all this stuff, and he does a lot of really cool stuff behind the scenes. And you know, some on camera. You go on TV USA Live, right?
Yeah, I don't know why they decided to put me on camera, but I'm there sometimes.
Well, because he's really smart. That's why I grabbed him for this. Because specifically with this paper, I want to hear your thoughts on it. But before we get into all this with Connor and with everything, two things to remind you guys. Remember to get your own copy of the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers. Remember to follow Freedom Papers Podcast on Instagram at Freedom Papers Podcast. And remember to post a picture of you with your books reading, because you can't just listen to what I'm saying. I never believe you should listen to people behind microphones and then take it for what it is and believe that as your own conviction. Please get your own thoughts, read through the actual text, the founding documents, the Federalist, the Anti-Federalist papers, and then come up with your own thoughts. And then, of course, join us for the podcast so we can all get on the same page and see what we're thinking. Other thing, I found out from the people above that apparently I'm like an influencer now or something, Connor. I got a code.
Influencer?
Okay?
I hardly know
never
her.
get codes, but I got a code for America Fest. I'm excited for this country music combined with awesome conservative speakers like Tucker and Candace and all the other cool people. They're going to be here right before Christmas, December 18th through 21st. If you want to get a ticket, you can use code Morgan for 25% off. So go to tpusa.com/AmericaFest, code Morgan for 25% off. I thought that was so cool. I never do like influencer stuff, but I was like, sure, I'll share my code. But I hope to see you guys there. It's here in Phoenix, Arizona. But Connor Clegg, let's get right into it. First, give us a little shindig on what you're all about and what you do here.
Sure, yeah. So my name's Connor. I've been with Turning Point, or kind of in the Turning Point sphere, for about 3 years now. And then about 2 years ago, I took over as one of Charlie Kirk's producers for his radio show and his podcast. I also kind of help manage his general operation, if you can call it that.
That sounds like a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a very, very controlled chaos, much like America is not. So, but yeah, it's a lot of fun, and we learn a lot, and we dive deep into big ideas that a lot of other places don't want to touch, except for the Freedom Papers podcast, which I have always admired because it kind of goes into these bigger, more meaningful discussions about something that is long and sustaining and beautiful and permanent, like our Constitution.
So you got a little tidbit right there of like why I enjoy hearing Connor speak, and that's why I invited him on. You're going to see further on, like, oh, this is why Morgan invited him to join. But let's give you guys a quick recap. If you haven't listened to the first episodes of Freedom Papers, we've been pretty much going in order. And so a quick recap, 2 through 5 were on the dangers of foreign forces that we have to be aware of and why we'd be stronger as a union. 6 through 7 were dangers from domestic forces and why we'd be stronger as a union to make sure and prevent those situations from happening. And then number 8, what we just did, was about the consequences of if we do have domestic conflict. And that can be the consequences of just what happens when you fight with bordering nations and why it's just this continuous cycle, similar to what we saw in Europe, and how these small countries are just always fighting, always wasting resources, and always causing conflict and hurt on the people. It's the people that really suffer the most and that struggle the most long term when there are all these conflicts. So that's really the consequences of having these kind of little civil wars, these fighting on our own land. But this one is titled The Union as a Safeguard Against Domestic Faction and Insurrection. Paper number 9. That's a hot topic these days. I mean, right now it's a hot topic. So I figured it'd be a perfect one for Connor Clegg to come on in. Now, I don't like to quote a lot of the text too often, but with something like this, I figured it was pretty important to hear what the founder said about this. Alexander Hamilton wrote number 9. And so I just want to start by reading, we're going to read the first paragraph. So Publius says, quote, "A firm union will be of the utmost moment to peace and liberty of the states as a barrier against domestic faction and insurrection. It is impossible to read the history of the petty republics of Greece and Italy without feeling sensations of horror and disgust at the distractions with which they were continually agitated, and at the rapid succession of revolutions by which they were kept in a state of perpetual vibration between the extremes of tyranny and anarchy. If they exhibit occasional calms, these only serve as short-lived contrasts to the furious storms that are to succeed. If now and then intervals of felicity open themselves to view, we behold them with a mixture of regret arising from the reflection that the pleasing scenes before us are soon to be overwhelmed by the tempestuous waves of sedition and party rage. If momentary rays of glory break forth from the gloom, while they dazzle us with a transient and fleeting brilliancy, they at the same time admonish us to lament that the devices of government should pervert the direction and tarnish the luster of those bright talents and exalted endowments for which they favored soils that produce them have been so justly celebrated. Ugh, that's a lot of big words, but wasn't it like that was a more beautiful sentence, I would say. Some of these, I'll admit, are a little boring, but that was really a big paragraph that stood out to me. And what are your thoughts on just that first part?
Well, Alexander Hamilton had a way with words that I wish more of our leaders talked in such a way today, right? Our president today obviously can barely string together a sentence, but that's a conversation for another time. Look, we know this, that our founders were deeply influenced whenever they were forming our republic by the Roman Republic, obviously, and then kind of the democratic state of Greece. So he touches on that here, and I think it's important to note that the occasional calms that he talks about, they seem like it's a tranquil moment in time, but whenever you lack a common order in society, you know that something worse is coming. And he touches on that here because, what does he say? The tempestuous waves of sedition and party rage are always kind of looming behind that kind of calm sea. So I think that we're living in a period of time right now where there is tempestuous waves of sedition and party rage. I mean, that's an understatement, frankly, right? So the question is, how do we move on from those and create a stronger society that has a more consistent lineage of order and peace and prosperity that we can actually rely on? So they could have never imagined, I don't think, where we are today.
No, absolutely not. And we had Paul Gosar on the podcast recently to talk about his belief that a lot of this leads to, or is coming from the fact that the legislative branch, which was supposed to be the most powerful, it's the branch of representation of the people, the population, that was supposed to be the most powerful branch. That was supposed to be the branch that passed the laws, that controlled the money. And instead, we've had decades and decades, generations of leaders in Congress that have willingly handed over power and money and decision-making, funds for decision-making, to the executive branch, to the bureaucracy. And that's where he pointed a lot of this too. That's why we have people like Dr. Fauci these days. That's why Joe Biden right now, our president, can just say, here's a federal mandate. I'm going to have 100 million people now concerned that they're going to be fired if they don't get an experimental vaccination. Right. That's the kind of stuff we're dealing with.
Well, and I think that the legislature, and this isn't talked about enough in my opinion, they've also ceded a lot of really important issues over to the courts that don't actually belong to the courts. The founders were geniuses. They were very intentional about how they put things together. So, for example, the question of, and if we shouldn't go here, let me know, but I think the question of abortion should be something that's decided very, very strongly, not by the courts, but by the legislature, and then decided on within the courts. And we know that Roe versus Wade in 73 has a very tenuous relationship with the checks and balances that our founders laid out, right? So we can just say, oh, it's the law of the land because the Supreme Court said so, and these 9 unelected people in black robes decided that is how it should be. But there's a balance that we need to get back to, and I don't think our founders could have ever. I keep going back to this, but it's the most prescient thing I can keep thinking of. Like, our founders could have never imagined where we are today. I mean, they're rolling over in their graves. I know that they are. Right?
Yeah, and a lot of people, I've had people make fun of me for this podcast. I'll admit, of like, Morgan, don't you think it's a little silly to be going back to the founding documents and doing something on the Federalist and Anti-Federalist ratification debates when this is the state of our country? Like, clearly they were wrong. And I was like, clearly you haven't read the documents. Like, hello. Right. Clearly you are missing the point that it's our leaders today that have totally neglected these documents. I think the more we look to those resources, the more we look to the original documents, we're going to be able to say, oh, that's where we went wrong.
Yeah, exactly. A society, as Burke says, is a three-tied knot, right? And so we have our present and we have our future, but obviously in order to keep that knot from unraveling, we have to look to our past.
Yeah.
And so there's not enough wisdom today. And that, again, I love this podcast and I love this program because it actually is one of the few, along with the Charlie Kirk Show, that's actually doing that. So keep it up.
Well, thank you for doing that.
We got to plug that, right?
Well, of course. And I thought that was interesting what you said about abortion. I'm very much in favor of that, of talking about this and making sure that, I think the legislature should be handling these important decisions because that's what our founders intended, for that to be the strong branch, not for us to rely. And we see this with the mandates as well. Everybody is scared to death because you have this executive mandate through ASHA, through these weird bureaucratic means that are affecting 100 million people. You can't do it. It's not right. It's not constitutional. It's not moral. And all of the leaders, Fauci, our vice president, our president, Jen Psaki, they all said, we don't have the capability of passing a mandate like that, so we never will. Now they've done it. So Americans that don't understand our federalist system, they're shocked and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so nervous. And now what they have to worry about is, okay, now we have to wait for this whole court system. That's the problem.
Slow.
Is everybody's like, well, Morgan, they're still going to move forward with having us fired because that's what the president says. And now we have to wait for this years-long battle of a court fight to have it protected. We saw the same thing. And again, President Biden, he has interfered with the court process and with this kind of balance of power, check on power, not only with abortion, but also with the vaccine, with he's saying, don't listen to the courts and their rulings, but also the eviction moratorium. Remember that? They decided to not act because they wanted everything to happen in a way that it would have to go to the courts eventually.
Yeah, that's it's such a flagrant disregard for our systems that are in place. And the people shouldn't stand for it. And you brought this up kind of in the open in reference to the first paragraph, the word insurrection, right? Or I guess the title. Insurrection is a word that gets thrown around a lot these days because it's a flashpoint relating back to January 6th, obviously. But what President Biden and I think the entire Biden administration is engaged in right now is probably more close to an actual insurrection than anything that we saw back in January. Because what an insurrection is basically just a willful defiance of laws or, the general order of society in order to topple a standing government. And I always think back, if I was some sort of maniacal evil ruler or, for example, Xi Jinping or the Chinese Communist Party or a plant in America, how would I destroy America? How would I unravel the fabric? And I can't imagine that I would do anything different than what President Biden and his administration are doing, right? So, yeah, I think that their intention is to just flagrantly violate these things in hopes that they can just run out the clock and just whittle away at the will of the American people. And I think it's working to a certain extent. But we're starting to see the tide turn, and that's a good thing. But we do have to be mindful of the processes and why the tide is turning, why we have this stirring of liberty and freedom in our bellies. And it's because, up until a few years ago, we were actually taught that America is a good thing and that the founding was right and proper, and they had permanent ambitions in mind for this country that are beautiful. So if we maintain our reverence for these documents and the order that our founders wanted to establish, then we can move forward in stopping this, kind of insurrection that the president is trying to do and overthrow the government, because that's exactly what it is. He wants to destroy America.
I actually thought of you because I saw this meme. I follow a lot of leftist pages just to see what they're saying, see what they're up to.
Gotta know the enemy, right?
Right, exactly. And I was joking with Alex, I don't romantically text anybody. So sometimes I'm like, oh, my phone's ringing. Like, who is it? And in reality, it's just tweet notifications from AOC and the Sunrise Movement and all these leftist groups, because I have notifications on for whenever they send out their PR stuff, just because I want to keep an eye.
Oh, totally. I get all their emails.
I'm a little aggressive. Yes, I like to monitor.
It's very funny, honestly.
People make fun of me for following other pages. Are like, you follow the White House account? Yeah, because I want to see what these people are saying. It seems pretty obvious to me. But I really appreciate that you're a history buff, and one of the memes that made me think of you, it was the founding fathers on Mount Rushmore and the rest of the historical figures that are on Mount Rushmore. And then it was there was 4 Native American leaders, and it was like, these are our real founding fathers.
Oh,
and I was
those were savages.
Well, what really got me going was I don't think they understand what that means, to be a founder and what that means to be a leader from that era. It was these young men that came together and said, let's look at all of human history and let's see how we can put together this mixture of ideas, learn from all of the lessons that is going to create a land of people that are free, that are represented in government, and something that's going to last. That's the thing, is not something that's going to last for maybe 100 years, but something that's going to last for centuries and centuries. And that's what it really meant to be a founder. You were a part of this experiment, this creation of a whole new concept. And so that's what's lost on young people and leftists and liberals, is they just think it's another group of guys came in and took over and then they were the founders. That's not the case at all.
No, not at all. I mean, it's a matter of object permanence, right? So our founders, they knew that what they were building was going to last far beyond them. With the Native Americans, God love them, some of the people that I'm sure were referenced in the meme, their idea of sustainability and building something was in order to survive the day, right? And to, live within their tribes for a set period of time. And they looked to their ancestors all the time, but they never looked forward. Our founders were forward-looking people who, and there's a reason why, you can correct me here, I get everything confused, but they guaranteed rights for not only us, but for our posterity's sake, right? And that's in the Declaration, maybe. But to guarantee domestic tranquility and ensure rights for both ourselves and our posterity, right, is the gist of it. And that's us. We're the posterity. We are the keepers of that eternal flame that they handed us back in 1786, and then again in 1787, then again in 1791, right, with the Bill of Rights. So it's on us to keep that flame alive. And like I said, this was native land before, if you want to call it that. We can get into that on another podcast, I'm sure. But they took it and they transformed it into something bigger than themselves. So
I love that.
Memes are great.
Well, yeah, and speaking of that concept, speaking of them looking at history, the next paragraph that I really loved from paper number 9 by Publius says, "The science of politics, however, like most other sciences, has received great improvement. The efficacy of various principles is now well understood, which were either not known at all or imperfectly known to the ancients. The regular distribution of power into distinct departments, the introduction of legislative balances and checks, the institution of courts composed of judges holding their offices during good behavior, the representation of the people in the legislature by deputies of their own election, these are wholly new discoveries, or have made their principal progress towards perfection in modern times. They are means and powerful means by which the excellencies of republican government may be retained and its imperfections lessened or avoided. To this catalogue of circumstances that tend to the amelioration of popular systems of civil government, I shall venture, however novel it may appear to some, to add one more, on a principle which has been made the foundation of an objection to the new Constitution. I mean the enlargement of the orbit within which systems are to revolve." Now, what I'm getting out of here is, first of all, he's saying thanks to the previous attempts in history, thanks to all of the last hundreds of years that have come, and when he means ancients, he's talking about ancient Rome, ancient Greece. He's saying the science of politics for the founders at the time is becoming more and more clear about what works and what doesn't.
Right.
Specifically, what they say is working and what failed the previous ancient attempts was the balance of power, a fair court system, and representatives that are elected by the people. And so a combination of all of these things, whether it was that the ancients didn't have them or they learned eventually that that's what would help them get through it, that's what's needed. And then Publius at the end says, and I want to add one more thing. I think that it's going to help if we have a larger union instead of small, tiny entities, small, tiny states, or a smaller confederacy. And so that's really what's up for contention between the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists. The Anti-Federalists were worried that if we had this larger union, if it would create this central government and that would overpower the people.
Right.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. I mean, they had just literally fought a revolutionary war against a monarchy, and so they were worried about monarchy, worried about tyranny. Makes total sense.
Right.
And without their fight that they put up, we wouldn't have the Bill of Rights.
Right.
And so then the Federalists, what they were saying is, actually, we would make the case that if we were all in this union together and we had limited government, balance of power between this small, they wanted the federal government to be small and encourage cooperation, and pretty much that's it. Right. We would be able to be stronger together, in the wise words of Hillary Clinton. But I see both sides on this. We ended up, ratifying the Constitution, but I really do love this piece, and that's really what we're going to get into in paper number 9 is, would it be stronger if we were larger?
Here's one thought on that, right? So I completely understand where the Anti-Federalists were coming from, and I have a lot of kind of sympathy towards their position, right? It's the natural, or it's a common cause of human nature at the time to be distrustful of things that are large and that outnumber your general perception of what is your world. Think about the time of the founding. We were roughly 13 colonies, right, give or take, depending on what year you're talking about. We didn't stretch from New York to California. California was still in Spanish control at the time, I think, right? And the thing is, the system that the Anti-Federalists wanted to put in place maybe would have been sustainable right then. This idea of smaller city-states, a less expansive government, and more autonomy for smaller populations to do kind of what they pleased. But again, I go back to this idea that the vision for America was always much larger than just what was existing then. So I appreciate the wisdom of the Federalists in the sense that, like, they knew what was coming. They knew that this idea was going to spread like wildfire, as it should, and as I hope it continues to do for generations. And the system that they would have put in place in terms of, like, something more similar to the Articles of Confederation, or just sort of like a conglomeration of city-states, or what the Greeks called the polis, right, or the policies, that just simply wouldn't work, because human nature is to grow and expand and to be larger and to conquer, exactly, which is the right thing to do.
And that was paper number 7. You weren't here for this, but it was basically saying one of the biggest reasons for war and for bloodshed, especially fighting by the sword, not by paper, is fighting over land. And it was the Federalists that saw, look at how much unclaimed land there is. First of all, a lot of the land was known as like crown lands, because that's what the king had said. It's the crown lands. They aren't exactly delegated to certain states, but he said, now that's all technically under the Articles of Confederation, our land together. So how are we going to split it up? And who's going to start fighting about it first? And then the Louisiana Purchase didn't happen until 1803. So this is a couple decades before. So that was really, really great what you said there. I like that they could see what was going to come in the future.
Well, yeah, and the thing is that I know that Hamilton knew this, and I know that the Federalists knew this. The downfall of the kind of Grecian system was that it was just, like I said, this conglomeration of city-states that had no general, overarching rule or order. And they were not able to sustain themselves because there was just this constant, peculiarity of issues within that individual polis, the individual city there. And that doesn't lend itself to the sustainability of a state at large. There's something bigger than just your own existence, right? This is the idea of transcendent. I don't like the trans very much. That was tough to say. A transcendent nature, right? That the Federalists knew was important. They were inspired by Enlightenment ideas in a lot of ways, and again, different podcast, but we can get into why that was a big problem and why we're seeing a lot of the problems. The Enlightenment, frankly, was not very much of a good thing, and that doesn't get talked about enough.
Well, that's what comes up next with Montesquieu.
Oh, well, good. Perfect. We're going to get there then.
Do you want to talk about it? Let's go.
No, we can get there. But yeah, you got to be able to look back and see, this didn't work, this did work, and Greece is a perfect example of why, kind of stringing together these smaller things with less of an authoritarian idea, and authoritarian is a bad word, I guess, but less of a general order idea, that we have to have some sort of guardrail in our society that can say no. Pennsylvania, for example. I don't know if Pennsylvania was good or bad or whatever. They were Quakers, so I'm sure they were polite.
They were like fighting with, I think, Connecticut for Wyoming at the time. That's for Wyoming. It was so weird. I was talking to Alex. It was the one that Alex was on with me. I was like, well, you see, this state and this state were fighting over Wyoming, and we're trying to like track it. Like, why though? Like, because imagine right now, like people in Connecticut, I think of like dairy farmers in Pennsylvania saying, we want to take Wyoming. Where like now you have this like ranch lifestyle. So that's part of the beauty of the country is it's such different vibes and lifestyles and interests. And that's next paper is paper number 10, where you talk about factions in the sense that when you live a different lifestyle, you're going to have a different view on government and what government should be in your life. And that creates division.
Exactly.
But yeah, I love that. Let's move on to what the founders end up saying about Montesquieu, because you mentioned the Enlightenment period. Montesquieu was a French philosopher, political philosopher, and thinker, and he inspired the founders in many ways, both the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists. And what ended up happening is the Anti-Federalists used Montesquieu's quotes against the Federalists, and then the Federalists said, you're misquoting him. And if you look at his full approach to the topic, and not just these small quotes that you're grabbing, you would see that he's actually making the case for us having a union instead of being disunified. Now, let's see what they said about this. So, the founder said, or Publius said, the utility of a confederacy as well to suppress faction and to guard the internal tranquility of states as to increase their external force and security is in reality not a new idea. He says, it has been practiced upon in different countries and ages and has received the sanction of the most applauded writers on the subject of politics. The opponents of the plan proposed the Anti-Federalists, have with great assiduity cited and circulated the observations of Montesquieu on the necessity of a contracted territory for a republican government. But they seem not to have been apprised of the sentiments of that great man expressed in another part of his work, nor to have averted to the consequences of the principle to which they subscribe with such ready acquiescence. Now, I don't like to read too much from this, but I think it's important when our founders look to previous thought leaders, we should also look to them too. We shouldn't, just cut that off right there.
And Hamilton even said that himself. He said, I've thought it proper to quote at length these interesting passages because they contain a luminous abridgment of the principal argument. So Hamilton even says, look, I don't want to read all this stuff necessarily, right, or write it down, but it's important. It's the right context,
You're
right?
like a fellow history nerd. I love
totally.
it. Welcome to Freedom Papers.
Great to be here.
Yeah, I highlighted that in my book, Connor. How funny is that? Let's read what Montesquieu was saying, because this is where the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists were taking different approaches to what he meant by this, and I'm on the Federalist side from this, but I want you guys to hear it. So Montesquieu said, "It is very probable that mankind would have been obliged at length to live constantly under the government of a single person, had they not contrived a kind of constitution that has all the internal advantages of a republican, together with the external force of a monarchical government. I mean a confederate republic. This form of government is a convention by which several smaller states agree to become members of a larger one, which they intend to form. It is a kind of assemblage of societies that constitute a new one, capable of increasing by means of new associations, till they arrive to such a degree of power as to be able to provide for the security of the united body. A republic of this kind, able to withstand an external force, may support itself without any internal corruptions. The form of this society prevents all manner of inconveniences. If a single member should attempt to usurp the supreme authority, he could not be supposed to have an equal authority and credit in all the confederate states. Were he to have too great influence over one, this would alarm the rest. Were he to subdue a part, that which would still remain free might oppose him with forces independent of those which he had usurped, and overpower him before he could be settled in his usurpation. Should a popular insurrection happen in one of the Confederate states, the others are able to quell it. Should abuses creep into one part, they are reformed by those that remain sound. The state may be destroyed on one side and not on the other. The Confederacy may be dissolved and the Confederates preserve their sovereignty. As this government is composed of small republics, it enjoys the internal happiness of each, and with respect to its internal situation, it is possessed by means of the association of all the advantages of large monarchies." So when I read something like that from Montesquieu, and when I hear the founders concerned about, say, a part of the Union rises up, what concerns me is, if, say, we don't have the Union, what could happen is a state could get too powerful, and like we've read in the rest of the papers and the rest of Freedom Papers through this podcast, when a state is powerful, guess what? Mankind is greedy. Human nature is going to lead to us to want to conquer our bordering states. There's going to be conflict. And so when you have a union, say somebody gets out of order, say there's an injustice, there's an immorality occurring in something, the larger federal government, the larger source of this union, together we can hold that bad apple accountable.
Right.
And same thing where, say something happens where this guy tries to conquer maybe half of the Confederacy or half of the Union, there's still this great other half that is going to be able to be sovereign because they still have their own powers. It's not like everybody's controlled under this one monarchy. There's individual state powers and they come together for this greater good. And so that's how I see it, is like everybody coming together for this greater mission. And you've kind of touched on this a little bit. We have a great vision as Americans. We all believe in this great thing, but there's Floridians, we have Texans, we have New Yorkers. All of us are individual. I mean, I'm from upstate New York and I've lived in Texas. I live in Arizona. I've lived in DC. I've lived in Boston. Every state has their own character. Every state has their own vision of, honestly, what government should look like. And every state is individual and unique and special in their own ways. Some of them kind of suck. Some of them are doing really good. And we kind of pull ourselves together for this greater vision. And if one of them stepped out of line, we would all still be safe. You know what I mean? We would be safe from their misbehavior.
Yeah, well, totally. And I can tell you, as someone who comes from Texas, who grew up there my whole life, if it were up to Texas, like the rest of the country would be like us. And I think if we were left unchecked, frankly, Texans would probably go to conquer the rest of the country, you know, speaking for myself here. But yeah, I agree with that in principle, but I'm wondering in practice if it's something that actually ended up working out, right? Because the idea of this, you know, kind of laboratories of democracy thing is this phrase that gets thrown around a lot. It kind of stems from the 10th Amendment, but the idea of checks and balances that the republic has over the individual states. I feel like it's a bit of a romanticized idea in our current day and age, right? And I would love for that to actually be the case. But when we see things happening like, let's just take sanctuary states or sanctuary cities, for example, right? That is a voluntary kind of rejection of the overarching federal authority and the federal law that, the Republican government that we set up put together for us. What's the check on that, though? They are committing a grave injustice to our nation by, protecting foreign invaders who are living here from the long arm of the federal law.
Yeah.
So how do we check that? Did they plan for something like that? I think the idea was our founders believed in the idea that Americans would always hold dear to the notion that America is inherently a good thing. We're not seeing that today, right? A nation that's not governed by a common morality, that doesn't share sort of a unity-minded ideal of we're going to live up to what the best of what America could be and not bring ourselves down to what the worst of America has been, then it falls apart. And we're watching that happen live. It's like Rome is burning and we're sort of just sitting here saying, oh,
yeah,
well, can't do much about it because it's okay. California sucks. I'll just move to Texas, right?
First of all, with this idea of, yes, like laboratories of the states, I like the concept. I think it's clear to us. Like, we think of COVID.
Sure.
Florida.
Yeah.
Doing a great job.
Florida's doing great.
Florida's doing a great job. The numbers are going down. It's a great experience. But now you have the propaganda from the media and all of these, honestly, like state, not state funded or sponsored, but they do the dirty work of the state kind of media
some of
companies.
them are state funded and sponsored. Look at PBS and NPR. I mean, they're total like left-wing propaganda hacks for the White House, which is such a shame because I don't want to pay for that.
Right. Well,
So,
I always
now I
make
feel
the
like an
joke of like
anti-federalist.
we kind of skipped the step of socialism in America because we didn't
Right.
even have to seize the means of production.
Right,
like
no.
the big corporations and companies just do the dirty work of the government already and say we're not going to give our products and we're gonna do all this stuff to restrict people from access to these products and services unless they comply with big daddy government. But that's a whole other thing.
It's a disgusting loophole, frankly, and,
Yeah.
and our market system has allowed that to happen, but that's okay.
So what really upsets me is when we see like the failures of the states, it's because like there's tyranny at the door of many states.
Yeah.
And how have we gotten to a point where people now have to pick up their families and completely shift all of their lives because of this laboratories of the state thing? It's not ideal, but people will tell me that's what our founders intended. And I'm like,
no,
I
it's
have
not.
a feeling that our founders
No, it's not.
had hopes that we would hold each other accountable before it got so bad
Right.
that we have to now move states to prevent our kids from, I don't know, getting forced vaxes between
Right.
5 and 11 and 5 and 12 years old in states like California, where now that's required for public schools. I had a feeling that they had greater hopes for us. And that leads me to my biggest thing in all of this. So my favorite copy is by Charles Kessler. And one of his quotes is basically when the founders and Hamilton and John Jay and James Madison wrote the Federalist Papers, they said that the Constitution is a document worthy of the rational and enduring consent of an enlightened public. And I'm
Exactly.
sorry, Connor, but it's simply the case that we have an unenlightened public. I don't think our founders ever anticipated this because they did not grow up in such privilege and luxury. Nobody used to. It's these principles that led to Western society and American society experiencing such glory, such success, such privilege of being born in 2021 in America, in the United States. Now we can look at these things and we can be so ignorant and still survive. We don't have to be very smart. We could still get by. The system will still pay for us to live. We can still live and not die of starvation and not die
Right.
of oppression here in America with just being idiots.
But that's not living. That's simply sustaining,
But
right?
they're fine with that. And I don't think our
that's the
founders
problem.
ever thought that humanity could become like this.
Right. And if they did, they knew that that was not people who were deserving to live in a republic, quite frankly, right? This is a really, really good gift that we have, and we shouldn't just kind of piss it away on this idea. Well, if you don't like it where your home is, then you can just move. No,
Right.
that's insane. And I hate this. I hear this all the time from so-called conservatives and people on the right. And they say, oh, the founders created these laboratories of democracy because they knew that, if you just didn't like something here, then you could just move. No, baloney, right? You're trying to tell me, right, that someone who was a proud Virginian, right, like Jefferson or like Washington, or Madison would be okay just up and moving.
Yeah.
No, of course they wouldn't. They literally that's just such a stupid idea on its face. Like I'm struggling to come up with the words for how stupid that is. Bring it to the modern day, right? And this is my problem with a lot of the corporatists on the right and some of like the market integralists that we harbor within our own movement.
I call them the DC Twitter personalities.
That's exactly what they are. And, they're disgusting, frankly. And I think it's really insulting to the founders' vision of what America was for them to just say, well, if you don't like something, just pick it up and move. Well, no. What if I come from a generational, kind of landed home? Like this is my home. America's not just an idea. We're not just a market within a nation, right? We're not just some sort of conglomeration of land that came together under this idea. No, I mean, this is something much bigger than all of that. An idea is great. Our land is great. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. America's great. But at the core of everything, America is our home. And within that, we have smaller iterations there, right? So let's say you've built a business over decades. It's a family business. I'm going back to the idea of this three-tied knot. That's what holds society together, is being able to appreciate and build on and respect your past, and the idea that you can just pick it up, throw it all out, go somewhere better to escape the tyranny that's happening within this laboratory of democracy or whatever the hell that is. Then that's a total assault on everything that made America great in the first place.
Yeah.
Well, and it's unrealistic too. Also, it's too expensive to do it for a lot of people. So you're just going to make poor people suffer in really bad situations because they don't have the privilege of being able to pick up everything and move. Because a lot of people, I know that in our generation, I read a study at one point. I think 70, 80% of us don't even have $1,000 saved in our bank accounts, right? Is that something like that?
It's pretty bad.
Yeah. So you go tell these people who are living under tyranny, saying that, if you don't get this in your arm, then you're going to be forced to, lose your job and lose your livelihood. Just tell them to move, right? How arrogant are you? How much of a sick, masochistic individual are you to just tell these people, oh, it's not that bad. Just go to somewhere more free. Why isn't all of America free? And why don't we have concern for our fellow countrymen either, right?
Boom.
That's the thing.
Oh, Connor.
No, I mean, it's like, I'm a proud Texan, right? And you can ask anybody, and you lived in Texas for a while. You know that we love our state more than probably anything else, right?
That's why I love Texas.
Yeah, because they have a sense of common pride.
Texas?
I'm from
area?
Houston.
Oh, okay.
Which, we don't love Dallas as much as we love whatever. We can get to the factualisms of that later. But no, if someone is living under tyranny in New York, then I give a damn about it because I care about my fellow American. I believe that we have a common shared identity, and that matters because it creates a common shared culture.
Thank you.
And to that point, English should be the official language of the United States, but that's another discussion too.
Yeah. Well, I kind of think going with that idea of preserving heritage, preserving culture, and really growing and building a life. I get so frustrated because we no longer teach that to young kids of you are building a life. Your life doesn't end when you have to get married and have babies and become an adult. Your life is not just you from youth to 22 when you graduate college and then have to join the real world. Instead, life is a really beautiful journey where you can grow and you can build. And I like the word cultivate. I always want to cultivate goodness and happiness. And if we have that mindset, for me, when I plant my seeds, when I plant myself down, I want to do it in a state that I love so much that I'm I'm going to grow my family here. I'm going to cultivate a lifestyle. I want a homestead, you know that.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But when I get land, there's going to be a home on it. I'm going to grow my food on it. All of this stuff, my business, I hope to have it on the property.
Right.
And I don't want to just pick that up and move somewhere. And when we make it as frivolous as, we can pick up anything, a business, a blah, blah, a family, a home, then we take the specialness. Is that a word? We take what's special about growing and building something like that, and we just strip it away. And I feel like that's so symbolic of what's going on in America today. So that makes me sad. And I also think it is very flippant to act like anybody can just move, and that's what the states meant by laboratories, or that's what our founders meant by laboratories. Because also, has New York or California or any of these blue states, have they learned their lessons?
No, of course
absolutely not. It's not like they
become
failed and people
emboldened and
moved out.
empowered.
They're still dead set. And people, I go on Newsmax all the time. I go on the news a lot. And they ask me, Morgan, do you think this is what's going to change their mind? Do you think they're going to step back on the restrictions? What about Fauci? Do you think he's going to lessen up for what he says we can do for Christmas or Halloween or trick-or-treating or whatever? And I'm like, have you... What year is it? It's November 2021.
Yeah, I think we're on 610 days of 15 days slow spread.
They're still talking about it. These people haven't learned their lesson as if this is a laboratory of experiments on different policies. And you're right. In America, yes, we can have different styles of government of states, but it can't get to a point where there is tyranny in some states.
Mhm.
Others are worried that it's going to come to them if they leave because we don't know what's going to happen next. California used to elect people like Ronald Reagan.
Sure.
Look at it now.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and it's such a shame the way that California's gone. No, I mean, you bring up such a good point because at the end of the day, if we don't have kind of a harmonious system of care and respect for one another as fellow individuals, then we're going to lose the nation. We're going to lose the country, and we're already seeing the results of that. If you don't give a damn about America, then of course you're fine letting 1.7 million illegal aliens walk into the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
You think the founders would be okay with that in the name of laboratories? No, of course they wouldn't. Get out of here, right?
Yeah.
Of course you're going to have no problem with a culture that just, degradates life or degradates, your value as a human being, right? So maybe we're seeing states that have these laws that promote licentiousness, right, in the name of liberty. So the idea that, oh, well, yeah, of course you can go be, a prostitute if you want to. Well, no, we should be striving for higher ideals than that. That's what our founders would have wanted, right? That's what God wants. Who are we, arrogant beings, obviously, but who are we to say that we can just reject all of these things and create this like disordered, chaotic society in the name of, searching for this ultimate utopia of human pleasure. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now.
It's selfish.
And it's super selfish, and it creates an unhappy people, and it creates a confused people, and it creates disorder. And if we don't have order, we don't have a country anymore. And if we don't have a moral people, then we no longer have a republic, because a republic can only be governed by moral people of moral people, right?
Yeah.
That's the word that Lincoln left out. And I don't know that he should have, frankly, but I think that that's what he knew was right. We are a nation that is governed, of the people, by the people, and for the people, but really it's of the moral people, by moral people, and for a moral people and a moral purpose, right? And so we have to get back to this idea of a transcendental, I got it that time, a transcendental idea of what's good and right and proper and permanent. And if we don't, then we're going to lose the country. So it's time to wake the heck up. And one of the debates that they're having in Federalist 9, right, is about the idea of monarchical tyranny versus civil liberty. Liberty is a phenomenal thing if we can all agree on what the definition of liberty is, right? There's something to be said, though, about, and tyranny is obviously a nasty word and it's not good, right? But if we held to the standard of a moral principle that's bigger than ourselves, then authority is a good thing. Order is a good thing.
Yeah, law and order. Guardrails
are a good thing. And law and order is actually really interesting, right? So people pair law and order together all the time. And that's good. That's how it should be, right? But order is something much deeper. I actually wrote this quote down. I think it's really interesting. It's from a guy by the name of Russell Kirk, who's one of the greatest thinkers, I think, on, no relation to Charlie Kirk, on our founding and kind of the roots of everything that we hold dear as a society. And he said, order is actually bigger than laws, right? So aspects of social order are actually determined by beliefs and customs. More often than not, what creates order is, the custom by which we hold ourselves and the beliefs which we all commonly share. Order is not created by, these positive laws that are enacted by the government. It has to come from within. And if you're a disordered individual, you're going to create a disordered society. We saw that with Rome, right? Rome fell victim to this in a lot of ways. But they also fell victim to the converse of it, where the centralized Roman authority tried to create, too many laws, too much order, and the people just became bored because they had no freedom. So we have to strike that balance here, right? Mm-hmm. So personally, and this is just kind of a debate that's raging within kind of the right now. We can dive into this if you want to. Mm-hmm. But there's these people on the right who say, well, we should just accept, we should be a big tent movement, and we should just accept whatever, transgenders, LGBTQIA, TABC plus. No, I don't want that being forced upon my kids. And Charlie said this the other day on his radio show, and he got a lot of negative press for it, which I thought was insane. He said, if Alexander Hamilton or James Madison or Washington or Jefferson, or name any of the founders, frankly, sat in a public library, probably named after them if they haven't been canceled yet, and watched a drag queen story hour, they would say none of it was worth it. And I think he's right. They're like I said before, they're rolling over in their graves right now. And we have to start figuring out a way to use the power that people elect, right? We elect our leaders because we want them to make our lives better.
Mm-hmm.
So we should hold our leaders to a higher standard and say, no, don't accept disorder. Don't accept the chaos that, these deeply troubled individuals on the left and on the right, frankly, are trying to force on us. We actually should want a little bit of a moral guardrail. We should actually want a bit of a legal guardrail that steps in and says, we have a country, and that's bigger than you, and that's bigger than your kind of individual desire to just live your life however the heck you want. And we're actually going to create laws, and we're going to create customs, and we're going to, impart beliefs in a positive way to build a better society that's going to outlast us. Because at the current rate, we're not going to be here for much longer. We're really not, and I hate that. And
I'm glad you said that.
We got into this earlier, and I want to kind of dive into it because
Yeah.
I want to push your buttons here.
Okay.
So my question is, as a proud American, someone who loves my country, right? I'm trying to figure out, and I think about this every day, and I struggle with it a lot because I think it's sick, and the idea of it makes me legitimately sad, right? But what the heck do I have in common with some pinko commie liberal hippie in San Francisco? We hardly have a shared language anymore, right? They identify as Zer and Zer and Z. That's not a language that I know. They're not speaking my language, right? The idea of a shared currency is no longer a thing because what even is currency in the current rate of inflation, right? Because of the policies that they support. We certainly don't have a shared culture. We obviously don't have a shared belief of what is good, and they hate me, right? They think that a white cisgender Christian Protestant male is objectively a bad thing. So why should I continue to want to share a country with them? I'm not trying to romanticize the idea of civil war, like you said earlier, but like some sort of a national divorce, I feel like is on the horizon, and I'm struggling, and I think a lot of people are struggling with whether or not that's actually a bad thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's the case, and that's exactly why the Federalist Papers exist.
Right, yeah.
It's why this debate happened.
There's answers to all of this.
In 1781, and I know people are frustrated right now, and first of all, we need to preface this. It is not, I don't think it is that our founding documents failed. It is that we as a population, honestly, it's like bittersweet. We achieved such greatness that our people experienced very little suffering and struggle.
Right.
And it led to this unprecedented level of ignorance and complacency, dangerous complacency. I honestly have a lot of blame for like Gen X and a lot of these generations that
the boomers are mostly to blame, frankly.
A lot of it, and it's not in the way of like the way they're usually blamed. Right. I would say it's more so that they assumed that this is just how America is, baby. We've reached the golden age. We are just a phenomenal country. We are going to continue in this way. And unfortunately, it's a very toxic way. It can only last so long. And we're experiencing the downfall of it now. So it makes me really sad. When we look to the papers, what concerns me is that they addressed this kind of stuff. What if we did 3 to 4 confederacies, larger confederacies? Right. And what if we looked at something like the bad states pop out and do their own thing? And all that really does, in terms of if you think of what the bad guys are thinking, I always think about it like that. Like women with self-defense, we have to consider what would a guy, if he's looking at me, think? And a lot of that is just looking at their eyes, giving them eye contact, saying that I'm strong. A lot of it, when we talk about foreign conflict, which would be the first concern, is that they want to see us divided. I mean, they want to be able to get on American soil. And so people joke about sending California off on their own. Okay, that's how you get California invaded by communist China immediately. Right. And thinking of solutions oriented, what does that actually look like if we did want to achieve a national divorce, if we did want to separate into factions or separate confederacies? I don't see any way of that going good, because guess what our founders said would happen? We would fight, because do you see what happened in Chaz and Chop? That was squashed pretty quickly, and I think federal forces should have been sent in earlier. That's the whole point of having a union. It's not so that we can have this massive bureaucracy that pays people like Dr. Fauci $400,000 a year. It's to handle situations like when there is an uprising and when people are being hurt. Like, I'm from upstate New York. A couple from Rochester was beaten by thugs with plywood outside of their small business. Do you remember that video?
That was disgusting. It made me sick to my stomach.
And so the husband is crying out for his wife, all this stuff. These people, we don't get along at all. Right. And they are pushing the line of, okay, so are we just different factions that can be encouraged to cooperate and get along? Or are we just completely opposite humans and by the sword instead of by the paper is the next step. That's where we really struggle here, because if we make that step, and that's why it goes from papers 2 through 5 is about foreign conflict, papers 6 through 7 are dangers from domestic conflict. What we just talked about in paper 8 is the consequences, and it's literally just people suffering. When there's the armies, there's the soldiers that die, there's the politicians that have to go through all of it, but it's the people that are going to be constantly attacked as soon as there's not a union, as soon as there's not a strong protector. They're going to be the ones that really struggle the most. And so that's all the different factors that we have to consider if we do want to separate ourselves and get smaller and potentially open ourselves up to conflict.
Well, and that's the thing is that I think we all know it won't work, right?
Yeah, and that's why I'm not saying you romanticize it. But it's important for us to have the conversations. But there's people out there that say we need civil war right now. Like, I hate these people. I don't want America anymore. Our founding documents failed. You have to have a serious conversation about it. If you're not willing to address the concerns and the struggles, what I look at right now is Middle East. Do you know how many people around the world would love to see us divide right now? Because they have their own interests. They would invade us. They would ally with different confederacies. They would ally with different states, and they would do it out of their own self-interest, whether that's for resources or money or just to see us fall, because like 9/11, they literally just wanted to kill us because they hate our lifestyle. There is so much risk in all of this that people can't see how special and unique we are for having this union. So if we could fix it, I think it starts by fixing, like you said, the education of the people. The enlightened population needs to come back. A moral population needs to come back. And we have to re-embrace these principles. That's why this is all happening right now, because the people of California, the people of Antifa, all of these people that hate this country, we need to get a larger population of people that do respect it. And this is my last thing. I'll stop ranting right now.
Good.
I'm going off.
I love it.
I have this theory, and people have said they agree with me on this too. We don't need a big, huge, enlightened moment. We don't need a big awakening. Yeah. Never in history has it been that this majority of enlightened people has succeeded and pushed through. It's a minority.
Oh, yeah, totally.
The minority, if it's enlightened enough, if it's righteous enough, if it knows what it's doing, it can choose the government that leads the country. It can choose the principles of the country, and it can move the country forward in a good way. We need just enough people on our side. We don't have to have this huge wake up. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with everything you said, right, frankly. And the idea of a divorce to me is disgusting, only because it fundamentally wouldn't work, and we know that, right? The problem that I have, though, is let's say that we have this small group of enlightened people that you're talking about, and we elect leaders who, run on the idea of doing what you said and bringing America back to this righteous and good moral order, whatever. Then they get there and they don't do anything,
well,
right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing to me.
Sucks.
That's the sticking point here, right? Is because I think that we have the infrastructure to do it. Think about it. People on the right control a vast majority of state legislatures. We control, I think, 33 out of the 50 governorships or something like that, right? It's only set to grow. But what's the point when you don't actually enforce anything? When you don't actually do anything? In Texas right now, or in Texas recently rather, there was a situation where a man was denied a COVID treatment because the criteria set forth by the state of Texas, the penultimate red state, I don't know if I can say red state, but the right-leaning state is saying that the criteria currently is focused more on equity, and if you're white, then you do not meet the criteria to receive this treatment, right? If you were black, if you're Hispanic, maybe you do. Why is that acceptable to a leader on the right who cares about unity and bringing together a country? Wyoming, a 16-year-old girl was arrested. Another deeply, deeply right-leaning state was arrested for not wearing a mask in schools. What happened because of that? Nothing. The governor was silent. South Dakota, for the longest time, the governor of that state, God love her, said, well, my hands are tied. I simply can't do anything about these unconstitutional, this idea that businesses can mandate because they're a private business. Malarkey. I want to say bullshit, but of course you can. Grow some intestinal fortitude that our founders had. They put their freaking lives on the line. They all agreed in that hall in Philadelphia that they would come together and they would risk life and limb and death, and they would all hang together if they signed onto that declaration. And now our leaders are saying, well, my hands are a little bit tied because our founders wouldn't have wanted me to infringe on the liberty of a private business, so I can't stop them from doing what they're going to do. The point that I'm making here is that demand more of the people that you elect into office. And when they don't act, in a way that is in accordance with what the founders would want, what natural law and order would want, then get them the hell out of there and find someone better that has a little bit more gumption to them that can say, yeah, we have a country and we need to save it. Yeah. We can't just be passive bystanders in the degradation of our country, because as American justice falls, so does the American man, and so does the American experiment. And we're so much bigger and better than that, and our best days are to come if we want them to.
Yeah.
So I, for the love of God, I hope that we want them to.
Well, you touched on that of like, what's the point? I can't tell you how many times I've door knocked and my shoe soles have worn out just for me to be disappointed after they get in office.
Think about how many people who love freedom and liberty went and knocked doors for Mitt Romney back in 2012, And where the hell did that get us, right?
Yeah, and so that comes, this complacency, this ignorance that we're talking about, this lack of passion for preserving the American principles, it's also held by most people on the right, I would say.
Oh, totally.
Most people, and it's very disappointing. I tell people all the time, I've seen behind the curtain. It's not pretty. Yeah. That's why I don't like to, I say I want to guillotine any connection I have with the established movement.
I thought you were going somewhere else with that. I was like, ooh, okay.
Well, I also, I don't even know what that means, but I also get a lot of guillotine death threats from radical leftists who think they're going to relive the French Revolution. It's a whole thing. They're flat earthers of economics. But that's my little phrase for them. But it's not just a problem of the leftists, and that's why.
And it gets boring bashing the left, because the left, we know that the left hates America. Right?
Yeah, that's obvious. The problem is how come we aren't moving forward? How come we aren't moving the needle? And so I see this as another reason for why this national divorce thing, this Civil War thing, is not going to work. Because guess what? Even if we have these safe havens, guess what?
They still
There's a
suck.
lot of bad people on our side that tell us all these promises and tell us all these great things. They first of all probably have never read the founding documents, have no respect for the principles, and are very, very complacent with how things are. They're just in it for themselves. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many people are like that aren't mission driven, that don't understand the importance of this. And so first of all, I say, if you are in office right now and you are not removing any fines or charges against people for COVID stuff or mask violations or anything, I'm never going to support you in the future. You're done. Your political career should be done. Mm-hmm. If you're in office right now and you allowed any of this stuff to take place in the first place and you fell for it, you fell for the Fauciism, you're done. You're dead to me. Yeah. It's not something that I'm interested in supporting, and you don't deserve political power moving forward. That's how I see it. This isn't like a campaign thing of red versus blue or anything. No, It's just no matter what side you were on, if you fell for this, you're dangerous, and I'm not going to support it.
Dangerous is the right word.
So I think that's why this is not going to work, though, because even if you make some safe, conservative, safe haven for people to go live, and then we send all the crazy libs to go have their Chaz and Chop of the future, not only would we probably go to war, because that's just human nature, and that's what the Federalist Papers are all about. People end up going to war and hurting each other, and then the civilians suffer, and it's just this endless cycle. Yeah. Thank God we don't have that right now. But how can we fix this? It's probably working on the minds of all Americans to make sure, not to indoctrinate them with crap, but to enlighten them. They deserve the truth.
Yeah,
they deserve the facts. They deserve the information that they're not getting in the public schools. Right. And so that I've talked about this a lot. I won't go into it, but rethinking what it means to actually educate yourself and the people around you, rethinking community, rethinking leadership. That's the kind of stuff we need to be doing from a grassroots level, from a basis level. It starts with the individual. What really bothers me, and I'll give credit to Charlie on this, he got a lot of crap for this as well. He said something about sexual anarchy. And everybody was like, oh, so you don't have a girlfriend? He's married. But what he meant by that is the chaos that comes with the anarchy of all these words. Yeah. It had nothing to do with sexual experiences. It was the crazy words that they're making up. These new genders, these new sexes, the LGBTQIA, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Everybody makes that joke. It's so overused, but it's still funny because they still add letters to it. All these new pronouns, they're changing language, they're changing definitions. And what they're doing is they're stripping away the most basic foundations of society and creating chaos, because now you have all these women that are on birth control from early ages. I'm sorry to bring it up, TMI, but they're putting us on birth control from early ages. Now all of a sudden we're 35 years old, which is the end of our fertile period. Right. Guys are still children at this age. Girls are still wanting to be boss babes. No one wants to settle down and have a family or commit and what we said earlier, cultivate a lifestyle and care about their home. When you have a home, when you have a family, when you have kids, when you have a loved one, you want to fight for them. You have something to fight for. That's also why people that are faithful, that are deeply rooted in Christianity and faith, they're dangerous. They're not allowed in communist regimes because they have something that they stand for that means more to them than some big daddy government thing that they're pushed on. Now, That's what I think the real focus is here. It's in the heart and the mind of every American.
Yes.
That's why I don't think civil war is a solution. That's why I don't think national divorce is a solution, any of that crap.
Yeah.
Connor, we've been ranting for a lovely hour. I hope everybody out there now can see like why I begged him to come on the episode for this topic, because it really matters to me so much. Thank you for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Will you be at America Fest?
I will be at America Fest along with Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Jesse Waters, Rand Paul. Charlie does this at the end of the radio show every day, so I've got it down pretty pat. But want to tell them about your code? I don't have a code. I'm not an
So
influencer.
I apparently am like an influencer now. Use code Morgan for 25% off at tposa.com/AmericaFest. You guys get your own copy of the Federalist Papers, Anti-Federalist Papers, and the founding documents. Read them yourself, and then join us every Monday for a new episode of Freedom Papers. And of course, follow the Instagram page at Freedom Papers Podcast. Thanks to Turning Point for sponsoring this really great educational content.
Amen.
All
God bless
right.
America.
Thanks, Connor.
Thank you.